Hello and welcome. I'm Anna Wild, the Birth Whisperer, your guide from a bad birth to a better birth. Today's interview is an absolute must-watch if you're interested in getting a complete picture on having an epidural. You'll find out whether an epidural actually makes for having a more positive birth experience and when it's a good idea to have an epidural. Dr. Sarah J. Buckley is a superstar in the world of keeping birth normal. Many people know her for her research and sharing on the hormones of birth, but today we're really fortunate to be hearing from her all about epidurals. She is a New Zealand trained GP or family physician with qualifications in GP obstetrics and also family planning. She's a mother of 4 children and combines full-time motherhood with her work as a writer on pregnancy, birth and parenting. She's the author of one of my absolute favourite books to read in pregnancy and before birth and after birth. It's called Gentle Birth, Gentle Mothering, A Doctor's Guide to Natural Childbirth and Gentle Early Parenting Choices. Fantastic book. It's sort of like an all-in-one, almost all you'll need. So get your hands on that. She has presented and published all over the world, and I almost screamed when she said yes to an interview. So excited that she's going to share about epidurals with us all today. Sarah, thank you so much for joining me today. I'm just absolutely thrilled that you said yes.
My pleasure.
Great. So, very briefly, what motivated you to start exploring epidurals? Researching.
Yeah. So what interests me about labour and birth really is the subjective experiences that mothers have, and now how that's incorporated into the biology of labour and birth. And part of that is what's the impact of various interventions or different experiences of labour and birth, you could even say. So in a sense, in a biological sense, I'm talking about hormonal physiology. So that's been my particular interest for a number of years now, and I've written a report. What I've written, let me just find it. I'm going to recommend this report, Hormonal Physiology of Childbearing. And so I wrote that in 2000, over 7 years actually, and it was published at the beginning of this year with Childbirth Connection. So a lot of what I'll be sharing today is out of that report, and it's available online totally for free. So if you go to childbirthconnection.org, you can download the whole thing. And there's a very nice, it's very long, it's got a lot of detail, and so it's really for people that want to know all that detail. But there is like an executive summary as well, and it's very easy to find your way around. So I highly recommend that report. So that's like the culmination, I guess, of all this interest over all these years. And, the impact of epidurals really is a subset of that. Like, what is that doing to women's hormonal physiology? What are the consequences for mothers and babies? And, I just want to say in the beginning that I'm not against intervention, and nothing in the report is against intervention. It's really making informed choices, like having the information. And really the inquiry is, if we do this intervention, is there a consequence for hormonal physiology? And if there is, what can we do about that? Like, how can we bridge that gap, if you like? So that's some of the things we can talk about today.
Yeah, fantastic. So you're actually moving into my next question, which is that epidurals are seen as a really easy option to deal with pain and fear of pain. It's almost like the go-to. And many women might not know about some of the possible downsides or the impacts on that normal physiology of birth for her own birth and for herself and her body and for her baby. So maybe you can just talk about those different areas, those impacts there.
Yeah, well, I'm also going to refer people to go to my website, sarahbuckley.com, and download one of my 2 free ebooks, because that gives a lot more detail than I can give in this talk. But basically what I want to say is our bodies are designed for safety, ease and pleasure in labour and birth and postpartum. And they're designed for mothers and babies to not only survive the birth, but like survive and thrive and go on and have more offspring who survive and thrive, because that's species survival. That's how we've all evolved over millions of years. And part of those processes is that the hormones, the hormonal physiology, the hormones that mothers and babies make during labour and birth optimise not only outcomes at birth, like help mother and baby to be safe and protect the baby's brain and a whole lot of other things you can read about it elsewhere, but they also optimise 2 processes that are essential for ongoing survival, which is lactation, breastfeeding, and mother-baby attachment. And if you think about mothers and babies giving birth in the wild, like our human forebears or in any other mammal giving birth in the wild, those things are just as critical as surviving the birth. If mother and baby survive the birth, but breastfeeding doesn't work, or lactation, if other mammals doesn't work, then the babies won't survive. And similarly, the mother has to be rewarded and motivated to give that dedicated care that every mammalian newborn needs, because every mammal is born in an immature state. It needs finishing off with, here we go, breast milk, because we're mammals. So, survival at birth and attachment and breastfeeding are all, we say, intermingled and intertwined with the processes of labour and birth. So that one of the problems with interventions is that when we start to interfere with the hormonal physiology, there's also potential that we could interfere with the processes of labour and birth, and also with the processes of breastfeeding and attachment. So, what happens as we go through the processes of labour and birth, and again, if you look at my book or in the report, in the ebook, Ecstatic Birth, Nature's Hormonal Blueprint for Labour, you see that these hormones build up during labour. They orchestrate some of the processes of labour and birth. For example, oxytocin causes the rhythmic contractions of labour, but at the same time, it's also building up in the labouring mother's brain. So it's switching on. It has intrinsic pain relieving properties. It has calming properties, and it also switches on the attachment system, so that as soon as the baby's born, the mother will attach to her baby. And if you think about other mammals, they don't go to antenatal classes and learn how to look after their babies. It has to happen biologically immediately after birth. So we have the same processes as that. So that's the normal hormonal physiology, and I talk about it in relation to not just oxytocin, but beta endorphins, which are hormones, as I call them, of pleasure and transcendence, the body's natural painkillers, adrenaline and noradrenaline, hormones of excitement, the fight or flight hormones, and prolactin, which is the breast milk producing hormone, also has effects in the brain of calming us and connecting us to our baby. So all of these hormones are designed to work, and a lot more hormones that we don't even have information about, are designed to optimize breastfeeding and attachment as well as survival at birth. And there's also processes, ways in which they actually help, for example, to protect the baby's brain during labour, to get the baby ready for the transition to life outside. There were many, many ways that these hormones help mother and baby. And what happens when we bring in interventions is there's a risk of interfering with these hormonal systems. And in relation to epidurals, what we know is, for a start, that they reduce oxytocin. And I'll just give a little more detail. You don't have to know this detail, but you might be interested. Yeah, really. What we think happens is that the sensations of contractions feed back into the mother's brain via a nerve pathway, and they cause the brain to release oxytocin, which then causes more contractions, which causes more sensations. So we have this positive feedback loop of the mother's sensations causing more oxytocin release. So the problem with epidurals is it interferes with the feedback of the sensations. So if the mother's not getting that feedback loop from the sensation, she's not releasing more oxytocin to cause more contractions. So we think that's why epidurals lead to the decrease in oxytocin. And this makes sense because, many women, most women actually, who have an epidural, their labour slows down, they end up requiring synthetic oxytocin to compensate for that effect. Now, as I said, the problem isn't just that it slows labour down, that's the physical effect of the, missing the oxytocin to cause uterine contractions. But also remember, I said there's effects in the brain. It switches on maternal attachment behaviours. It activates calming, connecting effects. So all those things also get missed because it's not being released from the brain when a woman has an epidural. So the questions might be, does it interfere with breastfeeding? Does it interfere with attachment? And they're sort of $6 million questions because there's been a lot of poor research in relation to breastfeeding. There's a lot of vested interests who would like to say that it doesn't affect breastfeeding. You can read that in my report. But my own belief, from the research that I've seen, is that it does potentially impact breastfeeding. And what I'm saying there is, I'm not saying if you have an epidural you can't breastfeed or it won't work. But what I'm saying is there's a gap there. We've interfered with the hormones. We've produced a gap in hormonal physiology. There could be impacts on breastfeeding. So how can we then support mothers and babies with breastfeeding? And in the studies where they did that, where they added extra support, then the effects of epidurals were smaller or even non-existent, which, optimizing hormonal physiology in this situation would primarily having mother and baby skin to skin immediately after birth, which is ideal for any mother and baby, but particularly if you've had something that interferes with the hormones, like an epidural, like a cesarean, that activates all these hormone systems for mothers and babies. And secondly, early and unlimited frequent breastfeeding again switches on all these hormone systems. And my interpretation of the research is that these things are meant to be turned on during labour and birth, and it's a very effective way of switching on attachment, lactation, protecting mother and baby, etc., all the things I've said. But if you don't get it during labour labour and birth, when the system is most primed and sensitive, you can compensate later on, but it takes a lot more effort. And, it takes many days of breastfeeding and skin to skin to get those hormonal systems going again, to have the baby waking up. And the other problems with epidurals is that, it can cause problems for mothers and babies that mean they don't have the opportunity to be skin to skin after birth. For example, it can cause a dramatic drop in blood pressure. It can cause problems for the baby. It can cause reduction of blood and oxygen for the baby by hyperstimulating the mother's contractions. Initially, it can cause a fever in the mother that causes concerns about infection, so the baby gets separated to be checked for infection. So there's a lot of, and it increases the risk of forceps and vacuum requirement at birth, because we've stopped the mother's oxytocin, which is the hormone that gives her the surge and this easy way to deliver her baby. So all of those things mean that the likelihood of mother and baby being separated at a time when you most need to be, skin to skin, particularly after epidural, may be compromised as well.
Right, and so you've mentioned forceps and vacuum extraction. So does it also increase the potential that you'll have cesarean?
Well, again, that's a $6 million question, and a lot of this research comes from the US, where epidurals are big business. It's a full-time job for an anaesthetist or anesthesiologist to be, giving epidurals to labouring women, and look, some of them do a really good job, just as Robin does. So I'm not saying anything against it when women really need it. But also, in hospitals in the US, it's a for-profit system, and the hospital doesn't make much money out of physiologic birth. If there's no interventions, there's no profit to be made. So apparently hospitals routinely bill women for epidurals because that's the standard practice. So, there's a lot of there's a lot of investment, I guess you could say, in epidurals. So, any research that says something bad about epidural is less likely to be published, and some of the research is really very poor in relation to that. But I think the best, so some research shows, yes, it does increase cesarean, some research shows it doesn't. That's not such good research, the latter. But I think the take-home message would be that the problem is that the epidural slows your labour down. It reduces your oxytocin, slows your labour down, and then you need synthetic oxytocin to get it going again. And if you have enough synthetic oxytocin to get it going again, probably it may not increase your risk of a cesarean. If you don't get a high dose of synthetic oxytocin, which has its own risks again, and you're more interfering with hormonal physiology, but that extra dose of synthetic oxytocin may get your contractions strong enough to reduce, to mean that you don't have an extra risk of having a cesarean. But it is not clear, really. Again, you can go to the report and read it.
Yeah, so that's the main point. But I think you've just also mentioned another really important point, that when women do go to hospital, it's all set up to have epidurals, and there can be quite a lot of pressure, not only from care providers and nurses, but from family and friends. Like, of course you're going to have an epidural, that's the best thing to do. So what could a woman do if she's feeling pressured to have an epidural when she actually wants a really normal physiologic birth? Any ideas?
Well, I just want to say something, go back and say something that you mentioned, the pressure on women to have epidurals, because the other hormonal systems that's impacted by epidurals is the beta-endorphin system. And beta-endorphins are hormones that produce natural pain relief. So what happens is a woman has an epidural and there's no stress and pain, so her body goes, oh, no, don't need this pain relief, so cuts down beta-endorphins. But they're also the hormones that put women into this altered state of consciousness in a physiologic labour. Some people say the woman goes to labour land, goes to another planet. One of the Native American tribes says that the labouring woman goes out to the stars to collect the soul of her baby and bring it back. Yeah, so that's what's meant to happen, and beta-endorphins cuts that off, so that women in labour with an epidural will be more normal in a sense. They won't be in this altered state. They won't be a force of nature as a labouring woman naturally is, and maybe they're more biddable. They can watch television, they can have normal conversations, and maybe that makes other people comfortable who can't deal with it or don't even know to expect this change in consciousness that normally happens in labour. So that's an important point if you want to not have an epidural, to let your caretakers, your support people know that it is a consequence, that you will behave in a more primitive way, you could say, and these hormones we're talking about actually are the same hormones of sexual behaviour. So just in that same way that, when you're sexually aroused in sexual behaviour, you might do or say things you don't normally do. Same thing in labour. It's a physiological effect on the brain. So letting people know. I mean, the most important thing is to choose your model of care and your care providers that will support you in this, because if you have a care provider that's comfortable with epidurals and not so comfortable with this force of nature that women are in a physiologic labour and birth, then the chances are you'll be pressured. So having a care provider, a midwife, a doula to take into hospital to really support you in being in this altered state of consciousness, and people that can protect the space around it. That's really important too, so that you feel safe and supported in this situation. One-on-one care with your doula or with your own midwife are two things that have been shown through research to reduce the need for epidural. So those are really, really important as well. So choosing your model of care, choosing your care provider, letting your people know, and having some ideas of what you can do when it does start to get painful, because for most women it is an intense, and we could say painful process. It's some women do have painless labours, but for most of us, there's some degree of stress and pain involved. So, what can you do? What tools do you have? And we all have these inner tools that have got us through labour since the beginning of time, which is using our breath, using rhythmic movements, rocking, swaying. And also, like I mentioned that analogy with sexual behaviour, having an environment that supports that. So sometimes I say to mamas, the best environment to give birth or to have a baby is the same as the best environment to make a baby, and if you can't, it's an environment with lots of people coming and going through the door, and you're not feeling, private and safe, then it's going to be very difficult for all those hormones to flow. And one last thing, and again, this is going back to hormonal physiology. What I say is that if we talk about the way our hormones work normally, this thing called homeostasis, where our body stays the same all the time. It's like this, our hormones stay the same, our body processes stay the same. But labour isn't like that. You might have noticed labour is like this. Labour is a snowballing effect. It starts off small, it gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And one of the reasons it does that is because there's a number of hormonal feedback systems, positive feedback systems. For example, we talked about oxytocin in the brain. So as oxytocin is released in the brain in labour, it causes more oxytocin to be released. And we talked about that positive feedback loop where the sensations of the contractions feedback release oxytocin in the brain, causing more sensations. That positive feedback as well. So there's lots of positive feedbacks that make labour snowball or get bigger and bigger and bigger. And, in the end, it becomes unstoppable. In the end, it becomes that the disturbance is not going to cause labour to stop after a while. And early labour it does, especially for first-time mamas who haven't been through all these processes before. But there comes a point in labour where it's unstoppable. And if you're planning to go to hospital, that's the time when you move. And I do workshops called Undisturbing Birth, and we share about what's going to help women to undisturb birth. And one of the midwives said to me, I say to women, it's time to go to hospital when you can't remember your phone number because you're so in this altered state and all those hormones are going and it's unstoppable, and you can move to hospital and it's not going to interfere with this flow of hormones. You probably have your baby within half an hour and there'd be no chance or no requirement, to have an epidural.
Fantastic. And do you know anything about whether having an epidural actually makes for having a more positive, better birth experience? Is there any research on that?
So they have looked at women's satisfaction with birth, and there's a lot of complexities about measuring that. For example, if you ask women as soon as they've had their baby and they're holding their baby, most women are going to say, I'm happy, because they have this halo effect, as they call it, of, everything's gone well, they've come through, maybe they were worried before, or, maybe they're euphoric, whatever. So there's a halo effect. So really to get the best, the most, you could say, accurate assessment of women's satisfaction, you need to look further down the line. So when they look further down the line, women who have had epidurals tend to be less satisfied. And one of the reasons for that is because, like we just described, if you have an epidural, you're more likely to have forceps or cesarean, which are not such positive ways of having a baby. You may be more likely to have a cesarean. You may be more likely to have problems with breastfeeding and with attachment. So you're going to miss that postpartum, as I call euphoria or ecstatic, that all these hormones build up and produce these ecstatic, feelings postpartum. Your reward centres in your brain, oxytocin and beta endorphins, turn on your reward centres and you experience immense pleasure following a physiologic labour and birth. So you're going to miss out on all of those things as well, or you're potentially going to. I can't say everybody does, but there's going to be a gap there of hormonal physiology. So satisfaction generally, if you measure it in a accurate way, then the satisfaction tends to be lower. Okay. And also, these hormones, as I said, stimulate the reward centres. So you're going to miss out on that stimulating of the reward centres. And what I also believe, or what the research suggests, is that the switching on of the reward centres that happens after birth is not just a one-off event. It actually primes or imprints pleasure for the mother in relation to contact with her baby. So the first time mother and baby meet and the mother's in this euphoric state, then she associates her baby with euphoria in a brain sense. She's connected up the euphoria, the pleasure centers, the dopamine centers with her baby. And so she'll continue to find her baby rewarding. And that's critical for all mammalian mothers and babies, that they find their baby rewarding enough. They're not just going to wander off and do something else. It's more rewarding. They're going to stay there and look after their babies.
Oh, Sarah, you're just giving us so much richness and packing in so much information. And maybe a good point to almost conclude on is, when is it ever a good time to have an epidural?
Well, epidurals are, they're beneficial in some situations, and certainly if you're having a cesarean, it's much better to have an epidural and be awake. Your recovery is going to be better. You're not having those heavy doses of total anaesthetic drugs, and you can see your baby, hold your baby, hopefully even catch your baby in a woman-centered, family-centered, natural cesarean, as they're called. So that's a really good thing. I mean, if things, if it comes down to it that you're suffering in labour and things aren't going well for you and you're incredibly stressed, then an epidural is a good choice. So I'm not saying it's never a good choice, or we should, be negative about women who have an epidural. Like, it can be a good choice for women. If you're in a situation where there's a high likelihood you might need an intervention, such as forceps or vacuum, then having an epidural is a good idea too. But my main point, as I say, is to mind the gap, to look at the gap. If you do have an epidural, there's likely to be a hormonal physiology gap, and then how can you compensate for that? How can you add more hormonal physiology? And the number one rule of that is usually skin to skin. Skin to skin switches on all of those hormonal systems for mothers and babies, and there's no limit to the skin to skin that you can have with your baby. Again, if you think about mothers and babies in the wild, there's nowhere else for the baby to be except on the mother's chest, and the mother has capacities to keep her baby warm much more effectively than a baby that's wrapped and placed in a cot.
Like, I love your stories in your book about all the time you spent snuggling your babies, having that baby moon period, and how that's perhaps even more critical. It's always important, but if you've had an epidural, if you've had intervention, to just make that a total priority.
Yes. I'll just share a story briefly. So it was a story I read in a magazine. It was a mother that had 2 natural births, and the third one she had to have a cesarean. And she said, when my baby came out, my baby was different to my other babies. I noticed something different about my baby. And she said, my instinct was skin to skin, so I had my baby skin to skin. She said, after 3 days, my baby was the same. All those things got turned on. And I think that's a really great example. If it doesn't, those few hours of labour and birth, or that however many hours it is, switches on all these things for mothers and babies in a very effective way. And if you don't get it then, you can compensate, but it's going to take longer. But it is possible. And breastfeeding, I call it Mother Nature's backup system. Again, all of these hormones are released for mothers and babies with breastfeeding.
Wonderful. It's just perfect. I love that. I love that idea that if there's been any issue with a feeling of being connected or bonding, just really to maximise that skin to skin and breastfeeding as much as you can. So tell us what you've got going on, Sarah. If people want to access more information, where can they get it?
Well, I recommend people go to my website, sarahbuckley.com. You can download my free ebooks, Pain and Labour, Your Hormonal Helpers, which is a fairly brief look at the way that women's hormones work in labour and birth. Also recommend, if you're interested in more detail, sign up to the professional e-list, and you'll get my book, Ecstatic Birth, Nature's Hormonal Blueprint for Labour, that goes into a lot of detail of what I've been saying with all the references. And if you want all the detail, this report is available for free at childbirthconnection.org. I also recommend, I've got a membership website called gentlenaturalbirth.com, and there's videos and DVDs and more information for parents with some of this information. And if you want all the details, there's a whole webinar on epidurals for professionals as well.
Great. Wonderful, Sarah. Absolutely great. Thank you so much.
My pleasure, and wishing you all power and pleasure in your birthing.
Thank you. Thank you so much for watching. If you've been inspired, then share now, because your voice supports positive, respectful childbirth for mothers and babies everywhere. Make a comment, send this link to your friends, post on Facebook, and sign up for more better birthing wisdom that I share in emails at thebirthwhisperer.com.